You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we are blessed with two really great guests. State Representative Elaine Nekritz. She is a Democrat from Northbrook. She has represented the 57th District for the last 10 years. We have her challenger here, Republicans. I was almost going to say Steve for some reason.
My brother's name is Steve.
Yeah?
You must have known.
Jonathan Greenberg. There is another Steve Greenberg in the field. Anyway, so it's Steve Greenberg, the Republican from Northbrook, Elaine Nekritz.
Or Jonathan, one of the two.
Right.
Did I just say Steve again?
Yeah, you did.
It's Jonathan. I'm going to say that repeatedly throughout the show.
That's okay.
Jonathan Greenberg, Republican.
Elaine will correct you throughout the show.
It's my tradition.
Name recognition is important. It's important for you.
Yeah, you got the last name
right. Yeah.
All right. So I can see I'm going to have trouble getting a word in edgewise here, but it's Jonathan Greenberg, Republican from Northbrook, the Republican challenger in the 57th. It's Elaine Nekritz, Democrat from Northbrook. She's been there for 10 years, seeking re-election. This will be her 11th year. The district itself includes Northbrook, Wheeling, Arlington Heights, Buffalo Grove. Those are the major areas. Smaller portions of Glenview, Des Plaines, Mount Prospect, Prospect Heights. Do we describe those areas as the northwest suburbs? Anybody jump in? Anybody? How would we describe it?
I think that's
northwest suburbs?
Sure.
When I describe it as north and northwest suburbs. I usually do both.
Okay. And let me just give a brief introduction here of our guests. Elaine Nekritz, a lot of people would know her since she's been here for, as I said, been holding the office for the last 10 years. Born and grew up in the Midwest, is that right?
Wichita, Kansas.
Wichita, Kansas. Okay, is that like Dorothy Land or what? All right.
Yeah.
All right.
A lot of people ask me if I know Dorothy. I do not.
Okay. Gymnast, competed for Trinity College, invited to the Olympic trials for both gymnastics and cycling. Undergraduate degree in economics and Trinity, in economics at Trinity, and law degree at University of Michigan. And 9 years at Altimer and Gray, the now defunct Altimer and Gray.
The now defunct, correct.
Were you an associate there, a partner there?
Both.
Okay. Committee man, did we say committee man for the Northfield Township?
Yes, you should say committee man.
Life member of the Sierra Club, chair of the Judiciary Civil Law Committee, chair of the Personnel Pension Committee. That's an important position. All these are important positions, but we're going to be talking a lot about pensions and what Elaine's been doing on pensions. And Jonathan Greenberg, state rep, candidate for state rep. Also from out of town, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Born and grew up, Fort Wayne.
Born and raised.
But your grandfather turned you into a diehard Cubs fan?
He's a Lane Tech grad.
All right. And several years in a not-for-profit, 5.5 years at APAC, American Israel Pacific
Public Affairs Committee.
Public Affairs Committee. I was going to say Political Action Committee.
Not a Political Action Committee.
All right. Currently, Jonathan is Director of Advocacy at the Fellowship, which is an anti-poverty and security project group which functions across the globe. Is that right? You call yourself a Mark Kirk Republican?
I call myself a Mark Kirk Republican.
You know, people don't use that a lot. Have you ever heard of somebody saying he's a Mark Kirk Republican? I mean, there are, I guess.
Oh, I think in the 10th district, in what was Mark Kirk's district, I think a lot.
You heard that a lot. Yeah. Okay. Teacher, youth director, and chaplain while you were in the seminary. You were an ordained rabbi, Reformed.
Reform.
Right? Okay. Business development professional at the Indiana Department of Commerce. Master's in Public Affairs, undergraduate degree, poli-sci at Indiana University. Is that Indiana in Bloomington?
It is.
I taught there many moons ago. So what people want to know, we're taping the show on August 8th, and people are watching this and they're wondering, you know, what's going on in the world of pension reform? Because they keep hearing, it seems every other day, about some egregious state employee pension issue. Somebody's gotten a tremendous amount of money, somebody's gotten a pension where they shouldn't have, and they hear that the pension has a tremendous amount underfunding. Some would say $83 billion. Some would call that an underestimate, depending on what standards you use. Ted Dabrowski from the Illinois Policy Institute on this show said, well, when you throw in the underfunding for the healthcare retirees in healthcare, when you throw in the new standards, which would say the $83 billion is an underestimate, you may be talking $200 to $300 billion for underfunding. And yet, Elaine, the question is, why isn't anything going on? Because the session ended, there was no legislation. The Senate passed a bill that only covered 2 of the 5 funds. I think Mike Nolan, who's a Democrat in good standing, said that bill itself would only probably deal with about $11 billion of the $83 billion unfunded issue. He voted present on it. So, long-winded question, but what's going on in pension reform? Elaine Nekritz.
Well, there's a lot of activity around the pension issue. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings, hours and hours and hours of negotiations and discussions throughout the spring session. It's been going on for longer than that, but there was a lot of activity around it, and ultimately at the last minute, you know, it fell apart over some disagreement over how accountable the local school districts and the community colleges and universities should be when it comes to paying for the cost of the benefits for their employees. I think that there was significant agreement around the structure of the deal itself, and that was what the Senate bill that you referred to, both Democrats and Republicans voted for that.
It was bipartisan.
It was very bipartisan. The Republican leader of the Senate, Christine Radogno, spoke in favor of the bill. Senator Matt Murphy spoke in favor of the bill. So there was a lot of consensus around that, but there was this other accountability issue that caused things to fall apart.
But to deal with the issue, it only covered 2 of the funds. There are 5 funds. Right?
Well, that's because we had this issue over the accountability. If we'd been able to reach some consensus on the cost of the pensions going forward, who should be responsible for that, the state of Illinois or the employer? If we'd been able to reach an agreement on that, then we would have been able to do all the 4 systems.
The cost shift relates to the K through 12 teachers who teach in the public schools outside of Chicago, grades K through 12. Does it also relate to the other fund, which is the state university faculty and employees?
Yes, it does. So, so that would be the downstate and suburban teachers, the university employees, and the community college employees.
And so the 2 funds that it did cover were state employees and the General Assembly.
And the General Assembly.
The 5th fund, which I guess people are saying is just not going to be covered ever because it's the judges, and you don't want to mess with the judges, right? Is that why? Because some people said 5 funds should have been covered, and then some people tell me that 5th fund is never going to be covered.
I would feel exactly that way, that the judges ought to be covered, but I will tell you, there was a court case in New Jersey that just came down within the last week, I believe, where the judges who were included in New Jersey's reform efforts somehow magically found it to say that was unconstitutional as it applied to judges. That's the dilemma that we face, is how to address that very similar issue that New Jersey just faced.
Well, Jonathan, you've heard this. You've been out there working the precincts. Elaine's working the precincts. You want to replace this young lady. What is it? Did you hear anything that struck you that shows a disagreement between you and Elaine?
Yeah,
well, you don't have to. I mean, you can say you agree.
Well, I'm quite that we disagree on the pension shift, and we can talk more about that. I think there's a failure of leadership with due respect to Elaine. I think there's a failure of leadership. I think that the governor appointed Representative Nekritz and others to a pension commission in October. It didn't meet until March. It was supposed to author a report in April, and it didn't author a report. There's the idea.
This was the working group?
Right. The working group was supposed to put together the plan.
And the working group has? Who are the 4 members?
Representative Nekritz, Darlene Sanger, Representative Sanger.
Who is a Republican.
Who's the Republican.
From
Representative Cross was on it, and Representative Flynn Curry was on it.
No.
Barbara wasn't on it?
No.
Okay.
No, there's only one. There's only one representative from each caucus. So it was me, Representative Sanger, Senator Bill Brady, and Senator Mike Nolan.
Okay. And those 4 people have been working, doing a lot. Cross is involved, obviously, as the Republican minority leader.
Well, he was on the hearing that I saw, the hearing in March that I saw, broadcast live on the internet, and you were sitting next to Representative Flynn Curry.
Yeah, that was the Pension Investment Committee.
Okay. But in any case, all right, so I didn't mean to distract.
Or it might have been the Pension Committee, I'm not sure.
I think it was.
All right, so you're saying there's a failure of leadership, and the failure of leadership you're talking about is Governor Quinn, and who else?
And the legislature. I think there's been a failure.
Democrats and Republicans? Or just
well, Democrats have been in charge for the last 10 years.
They're
Democrats have been in charge at every level of government for the last 10 years, and it's not like this issue snuck up on us. It's not like we didn't know this was a problem. It's been a problem going forward.
So what would you do differently if you were the state rep from the 57th district?
Well, in the first place, I would push for action. Everybody would know what I think. I think part of the problem is that we haven't had a firm idea of what, for example, Representative Nekritz. I've watched Representative Nekritz on Chicago Tonight a number of times. I don't really know where she stands on what we need to do. What she basically does is summarizes other people's positions and then says that's what we're fighting
What's
about.
your position?
On what aspect?
On pension reform. What would you do?
Long term or short term? What would I be willing to settle for, or what would I?
Right now, if you were the state, if you go to the door of somebody, if you knock on the door as you're walking the precincts, they say to you, what is your position on pension reform? I think they want an answer in about 30 to 60 seconds.
Long term, I think we need
What's that answer?
Long term, I think we need to move to a 401k style system. That's my long term answer to the question. I think we need to move to a 401k style system. I think that it's fairer to employees. It's difficult to defraud, and there's a lot more certainty going forward.
Long term, you
want
to move to a 401k.
Absolutely.
Short term, what do you want to do? What do you want to do this year? Was there any legislation that sounded good to you?
The most important thing.
The bill that was in the Senate. Would you have voted for that if you were in the Senate? The one that passed the Senate.
I probably would have voted for it, but it's insufficient, and I would have said so. It only covered.
Why is it insufficient?
It only covered 2 of the funds, and
Why
it didn't
else?
cover the 2 biggest funds.
Any other problems with it other than
it doesn't do a sufficient job of controlling costs. I mean, if what we're talking about here is a need to control costs.
Did it reduce the cost of living adjustment?
That was one option.
That
was one of the options.
Did the bill do that?
It was one of the options that, look, part of the problem is the Democratic model on this issue has been offer and acceptance. That we can't just lower costs. We have to offer public employees a couple of different options. It doesn't do a good enough job of controlling costs.
If they want to
offer
keep
people, if you offer people the opportunity to either forego health insurance and forego pensionable raises or forego their COLA, you're not sufficiently controlling costs. The new numbers on this are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the rosiest figures that I've seen are about $11 billion. It knocks off about $11 billion of our problem. And look, I don't want to be Daniel Patrick Moynihan here and say $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon it adds up to real money.
I think that was Ev Dirksen.
Was it?
Wasn't that? Yeah.
I thought it was Moynihan.
No, Dirksen said $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Before you know it, you're talking real money. Yeah, that was Ev Dirksen.
I hate to shortchange in Illinois, and I thought it was Senator Moynihan.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point being, if you have an $83 billion, and let's face it, it's more than that dollar problem, and you shave $11 billion off, that's great, and that's a good start, but it's only a start, and it doesn't do a sufficient job of controlling our annual costs going forward, which gets us to the pension shift, which I know
Before we get to the
pension
shift, okay. So Elaine, so how does this offer acceptance work? Exactly. What this bill that was passed the Senate, the bipartisan bill, only covered 2 funds.
Correct.
It'd say to people who were state employees, if you want to keep your health care subsidy, retirement benefit, then you have to accept a reduced COLA. Is that right? That makes it the offer of acceptance? Did I get that right? Is that the bargain on the table?
The concept is that the Illinois Constitution, for better or worse, says that you cannot diminish or impair any pension benefits. And so we have to find a way to get employees to voluntarily say, yes, I'll take that diminishment or impairment. And we do that by taking something that's not constitutionally protected, their health care benefits, their pensionable increases going forward, and saying, okay, I as the legislature have the ability to take that away, but I won't do that if you'll take the reduced COLA. And so that's the constitutional
Jonathan, I know you're not a lawyer, but do you agree with that analysis that you have to do that, or you risk?
No, I don't. And I'm not a lawyer, but I do think that part of the problem is, first of all, the unions don't agree that solves the constitutional issue. There's going to be a lawsuit over it no matter what. And I think this, trying to avoid a lawsuit doesn't help us solve the problem. I mean, what are we so afraid of? Let's try the case in court.
And the point of this is not to avoid a lawsuit. We're going to have a lawsuit. We all recognize that. In Rhode Island, where they passed a very significant pension reform, they've got lawsuits, and they don't have a constitutional protection, nor do they have any statutory protection. So we're going to have a lawsuit over this. And what we're trying to do is give ourselves the best shot according to some lawyers, and I'm not going to tell you. There are definitely others I don't necessarily agree that this is the only constitutional path, but we have to, But in the interest of getting a bill passed, this was the structure that we came up with.
Okay, and you would have voted for that bill if you were in the state Senate, or if it came before you in the House, you would have voted for that.
In the interest of moving the issue ahead, which is what I've done, I voted for 2 Tom Cross versions. I voted for 1 Speaker Madigan version. In the interest of moving the issue ahead, because we have to get something done. Yes.
But you would like to see all 4 funds covered.
Absolutely.
And you favor the cost shift that Mike Madigan introduced. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what do you think of the cost shift?
I vehemently oppose it. I think it's bad public policy. And it's also bad for taxpayers.
Why is it bad?
Well, for starters, it puts all of our houses up as collateral for what's essentially an insolvent pension program. So it ties our homes to an insolvent pension system, which is obviously problematic. It has the potential, it's going to raise property taxes. I mean, it's just going to. And so what you're doing is you're taking the IOU for pensions out of one taxpayer pocket and you're putting it into another taxpayer pocket. It's going to raise.
And how does it raise property taxes?
Well, it necessarily raises property taxes.
Just explain to me how.
Well, so I'll give you an example. So in our district, the overlapping school districts will have, by the time the shift is done, and let's deal with Representative Nekritz's.
What do you mean by the shift when you say there's a cost shift? What does that mean?
Well,
explain. Could you just explain to the viewers?
I will, and I think we'll use the bill that you've proposed. I think. So Representative Nekritz proposed shifting the responsibility for paying for teacher pensions over from the state to the local school districts. She proposed. It was originally, I think it was going to be 1%. It was going to be 1% a year. There goes the bat. It was going to be 1% a year, and Representative Nekritz's bill changes that to 0.5% a year. Okay. So right now,
0.5% of payroll. Just so people understand,
right.
This is a percentage of payroll.
So right. So the percentage of payroll that the state now pays is about 8.9%. So it's going to take approximately 18 years to shift the entire burden over. But if you look at
shifted over from the state
to the school district
as a state taxpayer to what they pay as a citizen in that particular school district or community college.
What district. The school district? It's going to shift from the responsibility of state taxpayers to the responsibility of school district taxpayers.
And you think that's wrong? Although people say, Speaker Mike Madigan argues, and I think the Illinois Policy Institute, who a conservative organization, the IPI,
nonpartisan,
and Mike Madigan, of course, not so conservative. They both argue this is an accountability thing, since the school district is deciding what the pension should be, in a sense, not completely, because some of that's decided by the state, and yet it's being paid by somebody else. So people say, shouldn't the person making the decision what the pension is also pay?
The short answer to that question.
Do you agree with that?
The short answer to that question is yes, but the longer answer, which is important in this case, is not under these circumstances, because the system right now is broken. Okay. Springfield broke it. It has to be fixed first, and then, as part of a broader package of education funding reform, I would certainly support the people who set the rates ought to pay them. But wait, I think this is important because I live in High School District 225 and Elementary School District 27. The annual pension payment for those 2 school districts comes out to about $5.3 million. And if you take if you divide that by 18, it's going to be about $300,000 a year. Now the first year that's not a big deal, but the second year it's $600,000. The third year it's $900,000. The fourth year it's $1.2 million. Now the first year maybe they can move some things around, they can figure things out, they can come up with $300,000. But the second year you're talking about real money. And I simply don't believe that there's any other way that we're going to talk. Look, we live in a district where they have some of the best public schools in the country. That's why my wife and I moved to Northbrook. And we're proud of those schools. We don't want anything to happen to those schools. We're going to end up paying higher property taxes. You have higher property taxes, you end up with depressed values. You're taking equity out of people's homes at a time when 44% of the mortgages in Cook County are already underwater. People are struggling.
Let's give State Representative Nekritz a chance to respond.
So let me just give you a very recent example that's happened in the last, as far as I know, in the last couple of weeks in Elmhurst, which is also a relatively affluent suburban area. The school board signed a contract to award 6% annual increases for 4 years to those that are at the end of their contract. Now, all that does is bump up those taxpayers are going to pay 24% higher salaries, and then then that boosts their salary by 24%, and they send the bill to the state. But this particular contract says that if the state does pass along the pension, the shift to that, then they're going to reopen the contract to lower salaries and lower the pension payment. I think that that's the appropriate goal that we ought to be seeking here. And so by aligning, I think from a policy perspective, to align the person paying the bill with the person, with paying on both sides of that equation, is in the short run and the long run will save taxpayers money, and we need to be moving in that direction.
Certainly not in the short run. Look, if you're lucky enough to have a contract coming up, then you might be able to negotiate that with your teachers union. If you're not, you're going to get to year 4, and it's $1.2 million
But over the course of a 12 to 14 year cost shift, there is going to be at least 2 or 3 collective bargaining cycles, and a lot of districts right now, when they're unsure what's going to be coming down the pike, they're negotiating 1-year contracts. And so I think that this is absolutely the kind of thing that the districts can consider when they're setting wages and salaries, which is what we would want them to do. I think it's really important that they be doing that.
I actually, again, long term, I agree with that. Because I agree with the importance
you're saying,
of accountability.
put that aside now.
Put that aside. I also think this is important.
Is that what you're saying? Put this aside.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I think is important here, the whole purpose of the pension shift, the whole purpose of the cost shift is to make about $3 billion that's currently the state's problem, anybody else's problem, so they can get it off of their backs, so they can not have to make difficult decisions.
I completely disagree. The purpose of it is to create the accountability that.
Why is this just happening now then? Where was the accountability over the last 10 years? There's been no accountability. The interest here is to get rid of $3 billion. We have an opportunity right now to tie what I think is a very difficult vote on the cost shift with the pension reform and make a perfectly accountable system. That's why we're looking at this. So we're taking a vote on accountability at a time when it's easier for legislators to insist on accountability?
We're taking a vote on accountability because it's very much tied to the savings that we're hoping to achieve on the pension system.
Let me interject to just say that before this came up, it was introduced by Speaker Mike Madigan. Governor Quinn said he wanted 3 things. He wanted a COLA decrease, cost of living adjustment decrease. That's in that Senate bill. He wanted an employee contribution increase. That is not in the Senate bill. He wanted a retirement age increase. That is not in the Senate bill. Now, people, including the governor, are saying there's a general consensus of wanting those 3 things. So let me ask you 2. Would you be in favor of an increase in the employee contribution in each of these funds?
Yes.
I'm open to all those things.
Not you open to. Would you favor that? If somebody said yes or no, yes, and you would favor an increase in the retirement age?
Yes, but I'll tell you who took that off the table. Was Republican Senator Bill Brady. So in the interest of getting something done.
He took those 2 things off the table?
He took the increase in the retirement age off the table, absolutely. He sent a letter to every school district in the state saying that we should not be increasing retirement age. Okay. And so— Did
he say why? I'm curious. I mean, I didn't realize.
You have to have Senator Bill Brady on to—
But he was in favor of the employee contribution increase? Because again, working to your 4-person working group, you and Mike Noland and Brady and Singer, okay? Were you 4 were in favor of the COLA modification? Is that right?
I think that there were parts of every one of those items had supporters in the room.
But not necessarily all 4.
But not necessarily all 4. Correct.
Oh, okay. And you're saying Brady wasn't in favor of the retirement age increase.
Right.
You're in favor of the retirement age increase. You're in favor of the employee contribution increase. You're in favor of the reduced COLA. Right. Was that right?
Yeah.
Let me just get Jonathan.
As a package
Jonathan, you're in favor
that gets
of those 3
us to
things?
a solution.
Yeah. Why don't we have that in the bill?
Because we tried to come up with a bill that would get Republican and Democratic support and would pass. It got 30 votes in the Senate with the things in it that could pass.
But Jonathan, just so we're clear, you're in favor of those 3 things: increase in the retirement age, increase in the employee contribution, reduction in the COLA.
Yes.
The other difference, and those 3 things you folks are in agreement.
Can I just say what was in the bill with regard to retirement age?
But just let me guess but you folks do disagree on the cost shift.
Yes.
That's something you favor, Elaine Nekritz. That's something you oppose, Jonathan Greenberg.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
But remember, I voted for legislation with the cost shift and without the cost shift in an effort to move something forward that can pass.
Okay.
I'm open to figuring out a path to yes
It's
on this.
a bigger picture issue, okay? It's August 8th. The governor, I guess, has called the legislature back in session for one day on the 17th. I guess mainly to deal with this Representative Smith issue to get him out because of allegations of his criminal activity and so forth. But people say, by the way, while you're down there, you've introduced 2 bills. You can't get it passed at that period. There's procedural things that would take longer than a day.
Right.
So you're going back on the 17th. There's no chance you're going to deal with this on the 17th, deal with solving this problem. I don't mean you personally, but the whole legislature. And people are saying it's not going to happen until after the election. And some people are saying, more the Republicans, is saying that, look, the Democrats don't want anything to happen here because labor doesn't want this reform, and the the Democrats don't want to lose labor contributions. So after the election, they might do something, but not before. In fact, they say that's why Speaker Mike Madigan introduced the reform at that time, because it would be a poison pill, knowing the Republicans wouldn't want it. Elaine, is that simply a partisan view, or could there be some truth to that?
I think that's a completely partisan view, actually. Okay. The cost shift had been under discussion with the working group for months. So we didn't agree on it, but it had certainly been on the table for months. So this was not introduced at the last minute as a poison pill. This concept that that somehow the Democrats dumped a bill at the last minute with 48 hours to go was completely false. In fact, Tom Cross's, the Republican leadership's staff, had been in negotiations with our staff on that bill. Again, we didn't agree, but they knew exactly what was in that piece of legislation well before it came up for a vote. So I think that it's a convenient view.
Jonathan, is the Republican Party running on this in November? Are you running on the issue that the pensions are a mess, they're not getting reformed, and people should vote for Republicans? Is that a clear thing? Are you saying that
one of the things that I'm running on is that Springfield, which includes the pension mess, is a mess, that things aren't getting done, that there's a lack of leadership, and that we need new leadership.
Is this the most important issue to your district, pension reform?
It's a piece of the most important district, yeah, or the most important issue, yes.
Do you agree? The most important issue, pension reform?
I think it's the most important issue for the state of Illinois right now.
I agree on that too.
Okay.
But to voters, I think it's a piece
We're
of the
going to
most
continue to
important
speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to thank, and I truly very much want to thank State Representative Elaine Nekritz. It's very hard to get incumbents to come on with its challengers. You deserve a lot of credit for that. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming too. I hope you'll come back. We had intended to talk a little bit about guns, a little bit about abortion, a little bit about the budget and taxes. We didn't get there.
We can talk about pensions ad nauseum.
Right, but it's an important issue, so I decided, I made the executive decision, let's let it roll. We'll cover one issue, one show. I hope we can get, there's a chance we can get both of you back for that, to talk about these other issues.
I'm happy to.
Is that a yes? Well, I can't hear you.
We'll see what the schedule allows.
All right, well, thank you so much for doing that. Well, real quick, in 30 seconds, more gun control, Elaine Nekritz, do we need it?
I mean, the Supreme Court has said that the gun control is an individual right. The debate should be about violence prevention and violence reduction.
Is it Crazies and Guns? That's what we're seeing in Wisconsin. Crazies and Guns in Colorado. Jonathan Greenberg. Jonathan Greenberg. Crazies and Guns. Is that the problem?
I mean, I wouldn't phrase it that way, but I think that's. Yeah, I agree with Representative Nekritz.
There are people out there who are kind of nutty who are getting hold of massive firepower, and we don't quite know what to do about it. And I don't know that that's a partisan issue. Is it?
It shouldn't be.
No, I don't
we don't know what to do.
Guns are not a partisan issue in the state of Illinois.
But
they're a regional issue.
You don't want to say, if somebody goes to a psychiatrist, should we say automatically they shouldn't own a gun?
No.
You probably don't want to say that. But if somebody,
any more than we should say anybody goes to see a psychiatrist should be committed.
But some people do have psychiatric problems. There should be a point where we should try to restrain them.
Yeah, and if we think we're smart enough to identify that point, that's a tough issue.
That's a lot of dipping into people's medical records too. So
yeah, exactly.
Taxes. Did you support the increase in the income tax?
I thought it was.
Would you have opposed the increase in the income tax?
Absolutely, and I'd vote to repeal it.